In an earlier video, I talked about just how fragile our memories can be. Many people are shocked to learn that they may not remember something as clearly as they think they do, or worse, may not remember something important at all. Sadly, some memory decline is naturally going to happen in life. Whether due to old age, distractions, or just too much information to process, we all can be a little absent-minded from time to time. While we can't change some of these things, we can still take steps to help us improve our memory. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of those simple steps that may help you improve your memory. I think this is especially important for college students. I mean, if you're a college student, just think for a second about all the time you spend taking notes, reviewing those notes, reading textbooks, and listening to lectures, all to try to help you better remember material so that you can retrieve it later on a test or an exam. A lot of times we can tend to fall into the trap that more time spent studying is better than less. However, improving your memory shouldn't be thought of in terms of quantity, but rather quality. So usually it's better to focus on the quality of the studying you do rather than the overall amount of time you spend doing it. This brings me to the first two concepts that I want to share with you in this video. The first is called the serial position effect. The serial position effect is the tendency for a person to recall and better understand the first and last items in a series best, and the middle items worse. So another way of saying this is if you sit down and say study for 2 hours, the serial position effect says you're going to have better memory for the first bits of information that you learn or review, and we call this specifically the primacy effect, and the last bits of information that you learn. We call this the recency effect. We will have much worse memory for the bits of information that happen to fall in between. The way I like to think about this is if you're a celebrity and you're meeting a long line of people, say 100 people are lined up and they want to meet you, shake your hand, get your autograph. Chances are you're going to remember the first few people in that line a little bit better just because it's the beginning of something new. We generally remember these types of novel experiences better, and in fact we see this with our memory as a whole. Throughout our lives, older individuals still have really good memories for events that happened to them in their teenage years and early adulthood years. I'm sure even now, most of you have clear memories of the first time you did something like drive a car, but not really the 5th, 6th, or 30th time you drove a car. Going back to being a celebrity and having to meet a long line of people. Not only are you going to remember the first few people you meet, but you're also probably going to remember the last few people that you meet, just because there's not a lot between that point and your recollection of the event to interfere with those memories. However, you're likely not going to remember the people that are in the middle of this line. They get lost in the crowd unless they happen to stand out in some way. You might remember somebody who's in the middle of the line if they happen to be really odd, bizarre, or weird. Maybe if it's somebody who is dressed in a bizarre way, or maybe somebody who has really bad body odor, or if it's somebody that is connected to you in some way, like a friend of a friend or somebody you went to high school with. This is a good analogy for studying. If you sit down and study for 2 hours, you're going to remember the first little bits of information just because of the primacy effect, and it's something new. You're probably going to remember the last little bits of information just because it's the most recent. There's not a lot to interfere with that memory. But a lot of the stuff in between ends up getting lost unless it happens to be something that is gross, weird, odd, bizarre, or that we think is personally useful to us. I'll come back on that comment about personally useful to us in a second. So one of the first secrets to enhancing your memory is to use the serial positioning effect to your benefit. Try to decrease that amount of middle information that we have a harder time memorizing. This goes very well with the second concept I want to talk about, which is called the spacing effect. The spacing effect is the concept that learning is more effective when study sessions are spaced out. Basically, more information is encoded in long-term memory by spaced study sessions, or sometimes these are called spaced repetition. So a good way to use the spacing effect to your benefit is to study for less time, but to do it more often. Maybe instead of sitting down and cramming for 2 or 3 hours once a week, you study for 20 or 30 minutes, but you do it every day instead of just once a week. Sometimes students get confused between the serial position effect and the spacing effect. And they do seem a little similar. Just remember that the serial position effect deals with how well you remember information presented at one time, but the spacing effect deals with how well you remember information presented over a period of time. So with these two concepts, we're studying for less time, but we're doing it more often. That means it's even more important to make sure the time we spend studying is as efficient as possible. The next concepts I'm going to talk about can help you do just that. Let's start with the self-reference effect. The self-reference effect is the tendency for people to better remember information depending on whether that information is useful to them. I always like to explain it like this. People are selfish. If we don't think something is important, we tend not to pay attention to it. While this may not be a new concept, applying it to improve memorization and study skills to many people is a new idea and something that they probably never really thought of before. The way I encourage students to use the self-reference effect to their benefit is by drawing connections between material that they're learning in their everyday life. Now, admittedly, some subjects are easier to do this with than others. For example, I teach psychology courses, and in my opinion, psychology is something that students have very few problems applying in their everyday life. This is probably easier than some other subjects. A good example of using the self-reference effect based on terms I've talked about in this video is to not just remember the definition of the serial position effect, but to think of examples of the serial position effect in your life. Or maybe the spacing effect, or any of the terms that you are learning and find difficult to remember. By doing this, you not just increase your ability to remember the information, but you also increase critical thinking skills. This is especially important because simply remembering information is different from actually being able to use that information. This is one of the main issues I have as a professor with college students. They think that studying simply involves memorizing definitions. But then when I ask them to apply the information, I usually just get blank stares back at me. So use the self-reference effect when you're studying to try to draw connections between the material you're trying to learn in your everyday life. Things that are important to you. Things that are useful to you. The next concept is elaborative rehearsal, which is tying the meaning of new information to knowledge that you already have. I remember when I was a college student, I had to take anatomy and physiology, which is known as being a really difficult course. A lot of the information included in that class involves basic root memorization, and this is one of the things that people have a lot of problem with. It's also one of the reasons a lot of students either fail or don't do as well as they wanted to in that class. Instead of just trying to memorize all the information through pure force of will, I decided to make connections between the different parts of the body, which is something I was trying to learn and didn't know, with parts of a car, which was something I did already know. Now, I was more successful with some things than others, but it definitely did help me pass the class. This is a good example of elaborative rehearsal in action. I related material I was trying to learn with information I already knew. Probably one of the best ways to maximize the amount of time you spend studying is to use mnemonics. A mnemonic is a memory aid that helps us to better organize information and makes it easier to remember and recall that information. I like to think of a mnemonic as a memory hack, and if you use them correctly, they can really turbocharge your memory skills. So a lot of you probably have never heard of the term mnemonic before, but I'm sure that you've used them at some point in your life. Do you remember when you were a kid and you had to learn the alphabet? I'm willing to bet you learned it through the alphabet song. That's what's known as a music mnemonic. What's interesting is that this sticks with us for a really long time. And even as adults, we still use it. Maybe we don't sing it out loud, but what if I asked you what the 15th letter of the alphabet is? Go ahead. Think of the 15th letter of the alphabet. If you're anything like me, you probably counted with your fingers while doing the alphabet song in your head. This is how powerful a mnemonic can be, that many years after learning it, we can still use it to access that information. There are other types of mnemonics, like rhyming mnemonics. A good example of a rhyming mnemonic is the one that kids learn to remember how many days are in each month. You know the one, 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31 except February. Or maybe it's the rhyme we learn in English to remember spelling certain difficult words. That one goes I before E except after C, or in sounding like A as in neighbor or way. Another rhyming mnemonic that is taught a lot in schools is in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. How about another great example of a type of mnemonic called acrostics, which involve forming sentences out of the first letter of words in order. If you've ever taken algebra, you probably learned a really good acrostic mnemonic when you learned PEMDAS. And remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Of course, it stands for the order you do math problems, with doing the parentheses first and exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and then finally subtraction last. There are many different types of mnemonics out there, and the beautiful thing is you don't have to come up with them on your own. If there's something difficult you're trying to learn, go on the internet and search for mnemonics for that topic. I guarantee that you will find tons of mnemonics online that will help you out. A lot of times I hear from students that they don't learn well through mnemonics. Of course, we're all unique, and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. However, I'll tell you that more times than not, the people that say mnemonics don't help them just haven't found a good way of using them yet. Mnemonics are a far easier and faster way to memorize information than simple rote memorization, which is just going over the information over and over and over again until you remember it. There are other things that have been reported to help improve memory overall and help prevent the decline of memory. Meditation is one practice that I've talked about a ton of times in these videos. I'm a huge fan of meditation for a variety of reasons, not least of which because it does help improve your overall memory ability. I think one of the biggest reasons for this is that meditation helps improve your focus, and a big part of memory is just paying attention. Proper diet, exercise, proper sleep are probably the three biggest lifestyle changes a person can do to improve their memory as well. In fact, I always tell my students that if you want to do well on a test, just make sure you get a good night's sleep before taking the test. Again, everyone is different, but if you're looking to try to improve your memory, try out some of these things I mentioned in this video and see if it helps. If there's something else that has helped you, but that I didn't mention in this video, maybe you can leave a comment below and share that with our online community. If you're enjoying content like this, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and give me a like with the thumbs up icon below. This helps me to continue to expand these videos and provide amazing content to all my viewers. Thanks for watching, everybody.